everyone. How are you all? That's Beth saying hi to you all, and good to see everybody here. As you're joining in, do share with us where you're coming in from. Please share your names with us. We are here for a webinar series that I absolutely enjoy hosting. This series is called Impact of Coaching, and this is a space where we bring the Coacharya alums and share their stories with you all and hear from them on what inspires them about the coaching space and the work that they are doing. And today we have a very special guest with us who I'm really excited to have this conversation with, Beth. Welcome, Beth. It's so lovely to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I have, really great feelings about Coacharya and the whole team. So thanks for inviting me for this conversation. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure's all ours. And I still remember when you replied and you said that you'll be available. I was like, oh yes, she's coming.
Little dance.
I know, little dance as well. I actually did that. I remember posting it on the group as well, saying, oh yeah, Beth has said yes, so she'll be there.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I appreciate the chance to be in conversation with y'all.
Thank you so much. So while everybody is coming in, I also want to let you all know that we have Nupur from our team, who is the chat moderator. Nupur, you can just say a quick hello to everyone. And as you all are trickling in, I want to just share a little about Beth. As you can see, Beth is a life and leadership coach. What's special is that she's an equity-driven organizational consultant. She's an educator with over 20 years of experience in social justice. She's also the director of Gender and Women's Studies program and professor in the Ethnic, Gender and Women's Studies department at St. Cloud State University. As you can see on the screen as well, we mentioned that her approach is rooted in somatics and mindfulness integrated with an intersectional feminist analysis. Wow. I think we're going to have a real fun conversation today, Beth, with so many things to talk about. This seems so exciting.
Yeah.
So as we get started, I want to actually know from you, Beth, how did you get into all of this? Like so many different things and all exciting and all really impactful. Like what's Beth's story?
What's my story? Well, I grew up in the Midwest of the United States in a very working class blue collar family. Most of my relatives worked in factories or office work. My mother was the first person in her generation to spend a little time in college. And I grew up with a single mom for the first few years of my life and very strong women in my family. And I think that all of those things started shaping my awareness of growing up anyway, economic differences, because we lived in a pretty wealthy town, but we didn't have access to all of the wealth necessarily. And then, fast forward, I did a lot of stuff in high school, leadership, etc. I went to college, and I, was always really concerned about, I guess at that stage of my life, I would say equality and injustice. But then when I was in my PhD program, I landed in a place where there was really strong community organizing around just about every social issue there was. And I learned a lot in that about systemic inequalities and power and how to collaborate with people to create change, and the value of community voices. And that's also where I started teaching gender and women's studies and working with mostly at that point, students were typical college age students, so 18 to 22, and really supporting young leaders to find their voices and their passion and learn how to create change. And so I've done that for many, many years, and it's really exciting. But in more recent years, I've also been really interested in moving outside of higher ed and working with organizations and leaders trying to create those changes within their organizations and within their lives, and really supporting them in that work. So it's been really exciting. I've learned a lot from the people I work with, and also the amazing social change work that's been happening in the last 10 years around the world. So that's a little snippet.
Wow, that little snippet, I'm sure, got everybody excited to know more. Sure the participants know why we've got Beth here now. Wow, you're such a powerhouse, Beth, and like so many wonderful things that you've been doing and you're continuing to do. As you were sharing, I was thinking about two words that you used. One was voice and one was change. And what comes to your mind when you think of those two words?
Voice and change. Yeah. You're such a good person to dialogue with because you hone right in on the really interesting components. Well, I think we all have a really powerful voice, and I think the world needs all of our voices. But I think some of us have more access to platforms than others. Because of power dynamics in the world, some voices are more valued than others, and whose voice gets to shape the system and narrative depends on where we are in the world and what the power dynamics are. But helping people, especially people who haven't had their voice validated and acknowledged and amplified, helping them really find their voice, because it can be hard to find your voice amidst all of these, messages in the world around us. So helping you find your voice and passion, it's one of the things I do as a coach, get really clear on that. And then, learn to hold your voice even when people around you don't want to hear it. And find other people who can support you in that process. And then from that, begin to cultivate change in yourself, because valuing your own voice for many of us is a journey, I think. And so internal change, right? And then also, what kind of world do we want to create when we really validate everybody's voices and really create space and listen to the voices, especially the voices who haven't had the platform in the past? What kind of world can we create when all of those voices are out there? And what kind of changes do we need in our organizations, in our communities, in our societies to really create space for those voices to offer their full gifts? So those are some of the things, and it's a journey. I think it's a daily journey there for myself. Some days I get up and I'm not at all clear on what my voice is. And other days I'm like, yep, got it. I'm going to articulate it. And so, really being kind with ourselves in the journey, but then also building people around us who can support us in that journey. Those are just some of the things off the top of my mind.
Wow. Really like what you said. I've made a note of it here, actually. Valuing your own voice is a journey. And as you said it, I was looking back at like my own life, right? And I was like, oh my God, yes, for such a long time in different places, I maybe consciously, subconsciously, I don't know. It just felt like sometimes your voice, actually, my voice wasn't appreciated or valued equally, as compared to others. And it's this entire journey that actually I had to go through to know that, oh, this is who I am. This is what my voice is, and like you said, it's still a journey, still going through it. But yeah, that's something that's going to stay with me as well. Like valuing your own voice is a journey.
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind my asking, what are some of the practices or approaches you use to really help you value your voice? What has supported that for you?
I think I'll first start with what the trigger point was for me. And because I think it all got connected through that. For me personally, it was like when you feel the sense that your voice is being looked down upon, it's like your entire identity is being looked down upon, right? It's like my thoughts, my beliefs, because they're getting translated in this form of expression, are like literally nullified, and for what reason, right? You may not agree with my voice. You may not enjoy it, but you don't have the right to say it's zero, so I think it started with definitely anger first, and feeling this thing of like, why me, you know. But I think what was important was to convert that why me into not a victim story and say, oh, why me? But to say that, okay, what is getting people to actually, react in this kind of a way? And what is it that I value in my voice? And I think it was a mix of different things, but I think the most important thing was for me to first accept who I am. And when I share anything, where it comes from, and I think when I began to draw that connect and appreciate myself for certain things that I thought, this is my story, this is who I am, this is where it's coming from. People might resonate with it, might not resonate with it. And I have no control over other people's reactions to it, So I think once I made kind of, connected the dots and accepted myself, I think the voice just kind of grew louder from there.
Ah, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And in some of the things that I'm hearing rings true for a lot of people's journeys, which is that I hear a combination of things, and I don't know if this feels accurate to you, but one is, what are the wider systems, structures, attitudes in a group or a culture that says so-and-so's voice is less important? Why are they nullifying my voice? Why are they thinking it's less important? And sometimes in my experience, helping clients or people discern that and realize that, oh, it's something in the culture. First of all, I'm not the only one that they're doing this to. And there's a belief or a norm in the culture that erases me, helps me realize it's not me. It's not that my voice isn't valid. It's that there's something out here that needs to change, to go back to that change component. I think the other piece is that when we live and are raised in a culture that regularly devalues our voice, I know there are lots of moments here in the United States where I felt my voice is invalidated, and lots of other groups, whether around race or disability or sexual identity or something like that. When you're saturated with those messages in a culture, it's very difficult to not begin to believe them yourself. And so, in my world, we call that internalized oppression, right? So in the work that I do. And so that's the inner message that says your voice isn't valid. And so part of the journey is changing the external and amplifying your voice and realizing, my voice is valid. I can't control what they're going to do. But also that inner journey of, when am I telling myself that my voice doesn't matter? And for me, it feels different. Like that's where the somatic piece or the embodied piece comes in. So when I'm really honoring my voice, it might be scary, it might be unclear, but there's an inner wisdom to it that I have learned to feel, and that helps me amplify and trust my voice. When it's an internalized oppression piece, the message feels really shaming, it feels really dehumanizing, it feels much less empowering. And so for me, learning to discern the difference helps me be like, oh, that's a learned message that I don't want to feed. And this is the message I want to, strengthen. And I think also, and I know there's a lot of coaching folk on this call, helping my clients discern that difference too. Not just at a mental level, but at a felt level, because some of those messages are so deeply embedded. You used the word trigger, right? Or I think that was the word you used. Like sometimes it's so deeply embedded that it's below my thought level, right? The shaming, dehumanizing piece. But both of those elements are important in that journey of validating our voice. And I think we need the wider change so that people no longer have to go through that journey in the same way.
Yeah. Wow, that was really interesting. I really like what you said about like a felt, I forgot the term that you used after that, like a felt,
embodied or somatic sense.
A somatic sense, right? And as you were sharing it also, like I could see it, right? You said something which is learned was something that I'm feeling, like the energy shifted as you were saying it. So we have
I want to also acknowledge there's a bunch, you were just going to say, there's a bunch of stuff in the chat, and I can't like read and talk at the same time.
Let's go through it together. I can see Sai has written, it's mostly because of what has currency, the environment, the people whose voice are validated. And if someone appears deviant from the norm, then there's resistance to it. Yes. Very, very, very
Absolutely.
True.
Yes.
Jayashree has written, cultural impacts in some cases are so very settled, to even get noticed by people. It's become a part of our being in some ways. And maybe that in some ways we are adding to the system without knowing that we are contributing, right?
Well, that's how the system works. It becomes normative and taken for granted. And in fact, I do want to go through some of the other comments, but what just came up for me is something I've been thinking about a lot because I work with leaders. And sometimes when a leader is working within an organization, what is recognized as good leadership or how they're supposed to perform, the kind of how they're measured, how they're evaluated, whether they're promoted, all of that kind of stuff doesn't always mesh or align with equity principles or inclusion principles. And so when they're trying to create change or create spaces to be more equitable or even share their voice, especially if they're one of a few of that particular group in the space, it can be really, really challenging because the system, what's considered good leadership, is often so taken for granted that we're not really analyzing, like, where did that come from? Whose voices does that disproportionately value? And then as a coach, how do I support that leader to keep their job, but also articulate their voice and help create systemic change so that their voice is more centered? And of course, that can't just be an individual effort. It shouldn't just be the one person, it has to be a collective effort. So navigating that, one of the questions you asked me was, what are the challenges leaders face? I think that's one of the challenges, especially if the system doesn't really want to change, which is often the case. So thank you for surfacing that. And that's where I think we really need to trust our voice, because often the system doesn't want to hear it, or they say they want to hear it, but they don't really want to make the change that will really let them hear it. And we also really need to build our community of support, right? So that we don't feel like we're speaking into an echo chamber or something like that.
Or always having to fight, right? Like one shouldn't have to fight for their voice,
Totally. It shouldn't have to be a fight. It should be a celebration.
Wow. So Pat here also has written something: writing your thoughts down, your voice embeds the thinking, which then becomes real and can be seen, and our voice becomes validated.
Yes, because I think that writing down, it's an internal reflection process, right? And we have to do that excavation, I think, and that deep reflection to get clear for ourselves. And for me, anyway, to really distinguish between what's my learned voice that isn't necessarily who I want to be and how I want to show up, and what's the voice I want to feed. So that internal transformation process is really important. Before and as we try to articulate it outside. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And Beth, as you share that, I'm curious to learn about your coaching journey. Like how did this the space that you were in, like how did you then begin to think about coaching and the role that coaching can play in bringing together this internal transformation for that external transformation?
Yeah, great question. Because coaching has just been a really powerful, community, and I've learned so much from Drayvon and Tracy and everybody else at Coach Arya, and also just a really important skill set for me to develop. So, I've been a higher ed professor for years. I've mentored and coached students for a long time, and I put that in quotation marks because even when I'm coaching students, I'm a teacher. So there's, it's not the same relationship. But as I started working with people in nonprofits, community members, people in small businesses outside of higher ed to really support the change in their organizations, I realized I needed different skill sets, and I needed a little more support in how I could best show up. And so I started exploring some different coaching programs. I will say there's a lot of coaching programs out there I have no interest in. It feels really transactional for a lot of the coaching program. I did a lot of research to find ones that felt like they aligned with my equity values and that would be more transformational. Because while there are times and places when we need transaction, like I've got this situation, how do I handle it? The work that I do, because I'm so embedded in inclusion, equity work, it has to be transformational, or it feels like we're doing is helping people be more successful in problematic systems, which is not really what I want to do. So I've really appreciated the community and the skills that I got through the Coach Aria program, which has really helped me show up in different ways for my clients and support them in doing their change work, right? Yeah.
I'm just trying to think the transition. I mean, you're still in the education space with your students, but wanting to do for a lot more for more communities, through other people's businesses or organizations. Like what got you to do, like, to build that lens in? Like, where did it come from?
Yeah. Well, I do a lot of speaking work. A lot of my academic writing has been on bringing embodied and mindfulness elements into anti-oppression work, because I feel like a lot of academic social work and social justice work has been very like, people get it intellectually, but the embodied reactions often derail what we care about. And so helping people do both, right? Like include our whole being in the transformation process has been part of my work. And so I've been doing speaking gigs around that, and that has resulted in people asking me to come and talk to their teams. And as I talk with their teams, I realize, I'm really interested in working with people in addition to my students. The change process doesn't stop when they graduate. So how can I support people in the other spaces to continue to do this work? And that's been really exciting, really, really exciting. And I do a lot of anti-racism work in the US. So I also do a lot of work as I'm a white-bodied person, and in the United States, that is the position of dominance, racial dominance. And so I do a lot of work with white-bodied folk to unlearn and disrupt racism. Usually I do it in partnership with a colleague of color, because there's particular work that different racial groups have to do and then come together. So because I've been brought into different spaces to do some of that, I realized it's really exciting to continue to support people in their spaces to create, and in their lives, right? To live their values, live and lead from their values. So that's just it's an ongoing journey. I don't know where it's going to go, but it's been really fun. And I've been able to connect with amazing people like you and the Coach Aria team and community.
So Beth, could you share with us maybe one or two stories of either people or systems that you worked within, where you saw that with your coaching practice or different things that you were doing, a mix of different things, you saw things change?
Yeah, I'm going to take a moment to reflect. And maybe while I do, we can all take a breath. Yeah, so a couple examples come to mind. Thanks for the question. One client was a experienced leader, but in a new position of leadership. This happened to be an academic institution, a university. And it was a part of the university that had gone through a lot of change, and also had a lot of, this leader was inheriting a lot of political and emotional baggage from the people she was leading, because the previous leaders had been really hard. And so she was coming in, having to inherit all of that, but also trying to create a major culture shift in the space she was leading. And so her team, the people she was leading, both wanted the major culture shift and had a lot of distrust because of the previous leader. And so really helping her discern the landscape of all the different variables that were happening and try out different ways that she could approach some of those challenges. In this particular case, it helped that I know a lot about how academic institutions work and all of the political minefields that are there. And then also really work with, what are the external challenges and what are her own internal self-doubts and how are they enhancing each other, right? Like, so helping her discern, like, there's a moment of self-doubt that isn't actually accurate, and what maybe how they're responding is not that you're not a good leader, but that it's coming from their years of distrust, and really discerning those things. So she was able to get much clearer on how she wanted to operate and have kind of a safe space to try things out. And I think she's made a significant culture shift in that space. It's ongoing, of course, but she's making major changes in the right direction for her group and her unit. In another situation, it was a small business and a really small, close-knit team, really cared a lot for each other. And, when you have a small team and there are patterns that aren't helpful, it can really fester a little bit. So really helping them get clear on what they care about, how they wanted to enhance equity, what are some of the patterns that are getting in the way, and how can they handle that instead of getting pissed and, really upset and resentful of each other. What are some commitments and agreements they can make about how they want to handle it moving forward so that they can preserve a valuable, not just working relationship, but they really care about each other, right? And handle the really heavy workload that's coming in. So those were a few. One was individual coaching and one was more group coaching. But it was, in both instances, it was really exciting to support them in their journey. Yeah.
I was thinking that for you as a coach, like on the other side, you have to exercise so much empathy, right? Because on one hand, it's empathy for the situation, and on the other hand, it's what this person is actually going through, and to deepen that understanding within them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And you really need both levels as a coach, and helping them discern both levels, right? That kind of difference between balcony and dance floor idea. But then also the internal. That's part of why I do the mindfulness and somatic and embodied work, because I think we really need to understand ourselves in order to be able to show up the way we really want to. And I saw a question about how I integrate my own life experiences that shape and disrupt me into my coaching process. Yeah, thank you for that question. And this might be a little bit of a sacrilege for coaches because of the message. I get a lot of coach trainings talk about how it's not about you, right? You're there to reflect back to the client. And it's this kind of idea as coach as a blank slate, like we're just showing up to reflect back. And I do agree that the sessions are about the client. Not, I have my own coach. I have my own spaces where it can be about me. So it's definitely about the client. But I don't think, we can be blank slates because we come with our own norms. We come with our own identities. I mean, even how I show up, people have certain projections for me. And so it's in the room, whether we name it or not. And also, I think my experiences sometimes give people permission to have their own experiences. And sometimes it can be a point of connection, right? So I often share short stories if they, are open to it, not to hijack, but to validate and to offer a a different dimension of how they might approach their own challenge. Because sometimes people feel like it's just them. And sometimes people pick me as a coach because I have certain experience. And so to not bring that experience in the room seems disingenuous. And I guess the other thing I will say is that when I'm picking a coach, or, you know, a doctor or a therapist or anybody who's going to support some deep transformation work, I look for certain experiences, certain perspectives. Like, I don't want to have to explain feminism to my coach. I need them to come from that perspective, so that we can get to the work, and so that our values are somewhat aligned. And so I look for that in a coach. And so I assume people who are looking for me are also looking for that in a coach. If they want something else, they'll go to somebody else. So I try to really keep the focus on the client, but also recognize that who I am is in the room anyway, and could offer some support for the client. I don't know, Sai, if that answers your question, but.
Wow. I do have a bunch of questions I want to ask, but I want to also just pause for a bit and ask our participants if they want to ask Beth anything. Please feel free to use the chat box. Beth, I know you and I were discussing before we started the webinar, if there are some exercises that maybe, you know, we'd like to get into with you, if that's a possibility. Sorry, I'm just throwing it like that here, but do you think that's something we can do? Like,
Sure. So this is a practice I learned from Generative Somatics, which is an organization in the United States, and you're welcome to try it. You don't need to, but it's a centering practice that can help us really get clear and align with how we want to show up. So you can keep your eyes open or closed. You can stand or stay seated, whatever works for you. I'm going to go ahead and stand. Just take a minute to get yourself settled. If you need to move around, just to feel in your body for a moment. Your feet can be about hip distance apart if that works for you. If not, whatever feels comfortable. And just let your breath settle. You might move back and forth to just find a place where you feel your center. And imagine your breath is going down all the way to the center of the earth, like you're growing roots, connecting to an entity, an earth center that is deeper and older than any of us, that's holding us up, supporting our paths in the world. And let your breath connect you to that wisdom and strength. And then drawing that up through your feet, your calves, your thighs, your inner gut center, all the way up through your heart center, through your voice that the world needs, through your perspective, up into your wisdom, and up into, imagine you're expanding into the world with all your gifts. Taking up your full space in the world. And in this particular practice, we call that our length, right? And kind of standing firm and tall in who we are, taking up the space we deserve, the space of dignity. And then holding that, you get to take up space in this world. Imagine extending that out from side to side. Like all, front left parts of your brain, your heart center, the full wisdom of your gut, both sides of your thighs and hips, both inner and outer edges of your feet, even beyond the edge of your body to other people and other living beings. Imagine all the other people on this call, all the people in your community that support you to be here and be who you are in the world. They're at your side. Right? This is the space of connection. Feeling into that. And in this practice, holding both of those, we'll go to depth, right? Imagine all the beings that came before you, your ancestors, other social justice leaders, all the people that created and beings, living creatures, plants, animals, water, that are at your back, that have made it possible for you to be here today in this world. Feeling them at your back with all the strength and all their stories. And then taking in their stories through your heart center, your story gets to be here too. Breathing into all the nuance and depth and complexity of your story. And then imagining all the people and beings that are going to come after you, that you are creating space for, right? We are one among many. And so holding all the dimensions of our being and all the beings that are around us. Now, root in and call to mind and heart. What do you care about? Like, just trust the first things that come to heart and mind. What do you care about in this world? What do you stand for or represent? And taking a few breaths to feel into where those are in your body, in your being, your soma. For me, it's bringing a smile to my face, and I can feel the energy of all of you in the room, just actually supporting me to show up in my full self. I hope it's doing the same for you. And maybe just reflect for a moment on how you feel after this short practice when you show up in all of your dimensions, connecting to all who are with you and anchoring in what you care about. How does that shape how you can show up in your day and in the work you want to do and in the ripples you're going to make in the world, because the world needs you? So take a few breaths. And you might even, if you wish, put something in the chat as you slowly come back about a word or two or an image about how that, what your experience of that was. And as always, it's important for me to locate lineage. So thank you, Generative Somatics, for that deep practice. You can do it longer or shorter. You can do it every day or from moment to moment. But I find it a really helpful centering practice. Thanks for going on that journey with me. Thank you, Kamla. Deeply strengthened by connections. Yeah. I felt you in the room, Kamla. I can even hear your laugh from our coaching program. Yeah. good or bad. It's not always a great feeling. Who things that have shaped us, but they are part of our story. And how do we claim them in a way that feels healing and empowering? Yeah, relaxed and connected. Yay. I think that connection is really important because we don't do transformation in isolation. Bell Hooks, famous African-American feminist, notes, we heal and transform in community. Yeah. Thank you, Nupa.
Appreciating my existence and everything that has contributed to it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I was thinking about the concept of Ubuntu as well. I am because you are. And it just felt so powerful when we went through this exercise. And what you said, right? Healing doesn't happen in isolation. It's not something that happens alone, right? We do it within,
right,
while being a part of the community.
Yeah. Yes, Ubuntu, absolutely.
I actually feel so strong right now. Like, yes.
Yay!
I'm like ready to go along with everyone else, like that's how I feel right now. And it also feels like it's not really like a competition and you don't have to like fight and get there, right? Like it's really the journey of going along with everyone, so that's what makes it worth being a part of. That's how I feel right now. Yeah. We have a question here. Jennifer, how do you remove anger about injustices you have experienced so that you can move forward with power to make a difference in those areas for others? Beautiful question.
Good question. My first response, and it comes from deep empathy and resonance, why do we need to remove anger? I think, Audre Lorde wrote a beautiful essay called The Uses of Anger, which you may know about. And she talks about how anger is a legitimate response to injustice. And often in unjust societies, which I think are many of our societies right now, only some people get to express anger without punishment. So here in the United States, it's really risky for some people to express anger. So part of it is, I think, coming to terms with our own anger and validating that it's legitimate. It has a role in the world. It's a valid response to inhumanity. And it can be a fire. It can be a catalyst for change, right? So how do we take that anger and use the fire that it is to mobilize in us or others the change that we want? But how do we do that with some discernment and care and dignity, right? Because uncontrolled fire can be really dangerous, right? It can wipe out things we don't want to wipe out. And I think this is the thing I see in a lot of social change agents and in myself, it can turn inward, particularly if we don't feel like we have a venue for it, right? So I think, I also think anger is a shield for what is the anger protecting? And how can we kind of support the tenderness or fear or whatever the anger is protecting? We don't necessarily have to show it to the world. It might not be safe to do that, but to understand why the anger is coming up and then use it skillfully, right? I'm going to use it to mobilize here. It's not going to be a helpful tool here. And I think in order to do that, we do have to do our own healing work and our own deep reflection and transformation work. I think when I was much younger, my anger was just like right there, and it was in control of me instead of me being the wiser self, being bigger than the anger. so that I could allow it to happen without driving me in ways that I didn't want it to. So those are just a few of the things. I think that's also why community is really important, because supportive community can hold up reality checks. I think as a coach, coaching spaces are really great places for that anger to come out, right? Because you've got a container, it's safe. And then you can help the client be like, okay, so what do we want to do with that? What's given the situation or the transformation you want, how can that be used wisely without coming back on you with too much blowback or harming people you don't want or being indiscriminate? How can you use it to align with your values? Those are just a few of the things, and I'm certainly not the final say on any of that, but there have been some really good books on anger recently. I'm looking at my shelf. Can't think of it right now, but yeah. I'll put before the end of this webinar, I'll put my email in the chat because I'd love to stay in touch with y'all.
I was just thinking the word you used, Beth, like how coaching creates that safe space, and to Jennifer's question as well, like what can we do about people who are going through any form of injustice? I think I was just thinking that, if you are in a capacity to create that safe place, maybe for one person or maybe for like a group, I think, like you said, right, like that anger, what's beneath the anger kind of surfaces and it gets the kind of care and the warmth that it actually needs, versus it going in any direction from there. So
yeah, I think people, especially, I mean, I work a lot with people who are marginalized in some way, shape, or form, and they often need a space for that because, as I said, it's not safe. Either they're going to get pushed back at their job, or it's physically or emotionally unsafe to express that anger. But if you don't have a place for it to go, it's probably going to go inward, and then it erodes from within instead of becoming the productive catalyst that Audre Lorde explains. So, and she also points out, and I remember when I first read this when I was young, I was like, light bulb, right? Audre Lorde in her essay, The Uses of Anger, was like, it's so interesting. She was a Black lesbian woman in the US. And she was like, it's so interesting that you're so obsessed and scared with my anger instead of the issues that are causing my anger. And that anger has been a protection for her. And so until she no longer needs that protection, she's going to keep it, right? Because it's necessary for her survival and humanity. And so I think making sure that people have the spaces for that. And I won't be the person for everybody to do that with, but for the people who, that's why we need all the different coaches. But I think, helping people have a healing relationship to their own anger, and then also, honestly, to other people's anger, right? I grew up in a household where I wasn't really allowed anger. And so it turned into resentment and that festers. And it's a lifelong journey for me to develop a healthy relationship to my own anger. And when I don't have a healthy relationship to my own anger, then I get overwhelmed by other people's anger. Like I can't show up the way I want to with other people's anger. I can conceptually know their anger is valid and they have a place, but the internal response that's so learned in me is fear of that. And so part of my journey is to really, like, I got to do my own work so I can show up with others the way I want to, right? I'm also looking this. I wish we could all like be around a cup of tea and like a fireplace or something and just have a dialogue with everybody who's in the chat.
I know. Yeah. And really like how you said, Beth, that there is a lot of inner work that you need to do, right? As a coach, as an individual, to then show up for someone else, right? And I think a lot of times when we also listen to other people and their challenges, it could trigger something in us as well, right? So it's so important to know what it's doing to us, and hence really like the focus that you have on community and safety, because I think once people have that is when I think people begin to, feel more free. So
absolutely.
There's some comments here. Some coaches are so interested in the approach of Sai has written here something, approach of problem solving, that they want to fix people rather than facilitate change. This comes from personal issues and attachment issues and lack of love in life. And I guess hence the inner work, I think, for any individual.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, the idea that we want to fix people and not systems. And whether systems can be fixed or whether they need to be completely transformed is another conversation. But I think as people, we are operating within systems, family systems, social systems, organizational systems, and many of the reactions we've developed are socialized and conditioned. So yes, they probably need to transform in some cases, but so do the systems that have created them.
Yeah.
And I see in the QA section that somebody asked about a question about a book on anger. I do feel like I have read a lot recently on anger, and I'm looking at my shelf here. Nothing is immediately coming to mind, but I know I will think of it as soon as I get off the call. So,
certainly, and maybe we can then share. We can, in our next email, we'll definitely make sure we share the resources.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah. Wow. So we just have a couple of minutes left for the webinar. Would anybody like to share any thoughts, anything that's coming up for them, or any last maybe question? Maybe one question is something we could take up if anybody wants to share. Okay. Thanks, Nupur, for sharing all these resources as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, so I have a question if others don't have one. Maybe it's not the best time since we only have a few minutes, but just want to know your starting thoughts on the relationship that individuals share with systems, and what can one do to have empathy for a system? Because I think I can empathize with one person and I can kind of come to terms with something with one person. But when it comes to an entire system, how do you define how I should be and how to go about it?
Yeah. Good question. Way to ask a really complex question right before we have to go.
Sorry. Just starting thoughts.
Yes. It's so funny, y'all. When she first told me that we were going to talk for an hour, I was like, how are we going to talk for an hour? And it's just flowed so lovely. I think that's one of the things that somatic and body work have offered me, in that I think of individuals have a nervous system that moves us into fight, flight, freeze, etc., that we need to work with in addition to the intellect. But I think systems have nervous systems too. Collectives have nervous systems too. I think about when COVID hit and everybody had to go on lockdown, right? There were the individual fears. We don't know what this is. We don't know about the illness. We might be losing people, and we don't have the collective grief practices are not available to us. That's happening at an individual level. At the collective level, we're still dealing with all of that, right? At our communities or our societies. But then think about organizations that had to pivot like that to go online. And what do we do? And how do we do our work in this new context? And I felt like there was this contraction in all layers. So when I think about organizations, certainly my diversity, equity, and inclusion, my feminist lens has an analysis of how the systems are operating, but also how are systems holding on to ways of being that maybe don't serve everyone in the group, and how do we get them to loosen some of that and also move towards life? How would this change support the organization's values? How could it better support everyone? And how do we get that nervous system to kind of loosen a little bit, and recognize that individuals in that system all have their responses to change. Some love it, some contract. All of those individuals are in the system, and then the system itself is also responding to some of that. And that helps me, both that model and thinking about systems as ecosystems. Those two things help me have more empathy for systems as well as the individuals in it. So those are the first things that come to mind.
Wow. That was really helpful. I was just very curious because when you mentioned it, I was like, yeah, like how do you really then build that relationship with? So thank you so much for that. Wow.
Of course.
It was so nice talking to you today, Beth. As we are closing out, any last thoughts, anything that you want to share with the participants as we close out today? Oh, and here we have another question. Okay, so Pat has written, don't we need to identify the outcome of what the coachee wants to achieve from the process of the systems and work back from there?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it's a pulsation, I think. Like there's a goal or an outcome and there's a working back, but then there's also a seeding and a generating, particularly if it's a longer term transformation. How do we seed that and generate it? And I think it's both, a kind of pulsation between both. Again, just off the top of my head, but thank you for such a rich conversation this morning. It was so lovely to connect with you and everybody in the chat. I did put my email in there and my LinkedIn is in there. So let's stay in touch. Thank you. And thanks, Coach Arya, for everything.
Thank you so much, Beth. It's really been, I think Kamala has written the right word here, very insightful. And I think you're doing wonderful work and it's so inspiring. I was telling Beth that when I first saw her LinkedIn page, I got so excited because all the posts that were there were so full of energy and purpose and drive and the commitment, you know, like it showed through all that you've been sharing. And I felt so motivated after reading what you had, all that you'd been doing to really write to you, to get in touch with you. So I'm glad that you could come today and share with us about your work and what inspires you. And we're going to stay in touch and hopefully we connect again for another conversation very soon.
Be great. Thank you so much. Yes, and I just wish you all a lovely rest of your month, and thank you for your presence in the world, and thanks again for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Beth, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. It was lovely to have you all here, and thank you for all the amazing questions and thoughts that you all continuously posted on the group. As we are closing out, we still have about 2 more minutes. So if I can just request you all to just hold on for 2 minutes, I want to share a little about what we're bringing to you tomorrow. And you heard that right. We have a special webinar tomorrow. It's called The Hero's Journey. It's a special series that we're starting with our alumnus, Avril. And she's going to be bringing in different speakers each month. Nupur, can I please request you to... Perfect. If you could also share the poster here for everyone. She's already posted the registration link here. We have a different registration link for this series. So I'll request you all to just go through the details and take a minute to register. It would be amazing to have you all join us tomorrow as well. And if you know more people who would enjoy this, then do let them know about the webinar tomorrow. I'll just quickly share my screen with you so you can see who, who we are bringing in. Yes, so we have Avril as the host and we have Venerable Tenzing Namgyong joining us, and he's going to share with us his story of how he entered the spiritual world and what got him to take this path and his hero's journey that he's going to share with Avril. So hope to see you all tomorrow. It's happening at 9 o'clock and the registration link is, shared here. So thank you so much, everyone. And thank you once again, Beth, and have a lovely rest of the day.
Yes, thank you. Take care, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.